Hi, and welcome to Talking Tech, the podcast all about technology. In this particular episode, I am joined by the wonderful Kev Eley. Thank you so much for joining. Pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me on Talking Tech, Catherine.
You're welcome. Hopefully it's the first of many. So
Absolutely.
So I know we're here to talk about Dataminr, and it's technology that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
But firstly, especially for the audience's point of view, I really want to know a little bit more about yourself. So anybody who's listening or watching who hasn't come across Kev previously, you've got such an impressive background. I mean, from corporations like IBM and Microsoft, some big corporates, right the way through to LogRhythm, TrapX, Egress, Exabeam, and now more recently Dataminr. Tell me, what was the most memorable one and why?
Well, every single company I've worked at has been memorable for a variety of different reasons. I mean, if I go all the way back to when I started at IBM, which was a long time ago, that was really memorable because that gave me the grounding in sales and sales leadership. Microsoft was wild. I mean, my first introduction to Microsoft was, believe it or not, a beach party, Miami Beach. And Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO at the time, had organized champagne for all of the Microsoft employees that were there. Wow. Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine were headlining that night. These, Catherine, these were different times than the times we live in today. But fast forwarding to my move into cybersecurity, which was about 16 years ago, that really opened my eyes up to this whole new domain. And I felt, and I still feel, very passionate about the requirements that organizations have to improve their cybersecurity posture. And really from a LogRhythm and Exabeam standpoint, and now at Dataminr, that's been the theme for the last 15, 16 years of my career, is to really go deep into cybersecurity. So that's been memorable. And I guess, look, I mean, when you've had a lengthy career in IT, you make a lot of connections, a lot of people. I had the great fortune to work with some incredible people over the years, and they're still, friends. They transcend into friendship and stuff. So yeah, there's lots of memories.
Oh, do you know what? That was quite tame. I was expecting like Christmas parties and stories and all sorts of things, but
I've kept it clean, Catherine.
Yeah, but I mean, beach parties, Gloria Estefan. I mean, wow, that's definitely stories to remember. What made you join the industry, or how did you fall into it? Because we've had so many stories from people who've said they've kind of fallen in and then they've kind of never left, or people who said, well, actually it was a completely different track and they sort of fell into it almost by accident. How did you start your journey, and why?
By chance. Ultimately, my degree was actually in environmental biology, believe it or not, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I do now. And when I completed my degree, I was considering continuing with a master's and potentially then maybe going into a doctorate, wanting to save the planet, know. And I actually applied for a job at IBM. And that was initially just to earn some money, from going from student life, to get some savings so I could do the masters. But then when I got to IBM and actually started earning some money, I quite liked it. And at that point, I was like, actually, I'm going to carry on in this tech career. Yeah. The first 6 months at IBM, I have to say, Catherine, I had no idea about anything to do with technology and the systems. I was completely clueless. I was a 22-year-old, first job in a corporation where it spoke its own language, and I didn't know that language. But after about 6 months, I started to interact with this breed of people, salespeople, and they'd wander into the office and, they'd be sharp suited and, wearing, nice watches, and they'd be the ones that were driving the BMWs and the Mercs in the car park. And I looked at that and thought, wow. And that opened my eyes, and I thought, that's what I want. I want a career in IT sales. And, that's the path that I then went on. And, it's been good.
It kind of draws you in, doesn't it? I mean, I very much like you. I kind of went into sales admin initially, and then I saw the salespeople with their flashy cars and and I kept thinking, I'm doing their admin and they're making the money. I'm doing something wrong here, and that's very much the same. But and I get approached so many, I don't know if you do it as well at the moment, but I get approached so many times by people who want to come into the industry and they say, well, where should I focus? Where should I go? What should I do? It's very difficult because, cybersecurity especially is such a broad landscape. Mm-hmm. There are so many areas. I think people tend to go in one particular area and then sort of find their niche or their vertical and then kind of go off from there. So it's interesting that you've said, from an IBM's perspective or, Microsoft's perspective, so many different routes you could go down, but ultimately you kind of find your kind of your passion and your path, I guess.
And that's absolutely right. And no path is right or wrong necessarily. It's all down to the individual and what the individual wants to achieve. And I've long believed that if you find something that you're really passionate about, that you can be really good at because you devote yourself to improving, self-improvement, and frankly, you can make money at doing that, then that's where you need to concentrate. Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, has that concept for companies, be the best you can in the world, focus on things that you really care about, that's going to drive the economic engine. And that for me translates into career as well. So that tends to be my advice to people is really be clear about, what you want to achieve and what you want to do, and then focus on that.
Brilliant. And that may be the one thing, but if there was one thing that you could kind of go back to your former 18, 22-year-old self, what would be the one thing or, a kind of a word of advice or, word of warning?
a word of warning would be don't drink Red Stripe lager.
On a beach party.
Yeah, on a beach party, yeah. A word of advice would be to really be... work on your confidence, work on your interpersonal skills, work on your, kind of developing your emotional intelligence, because, so much of what we do in the world of work is around relationships with others and how you engage with others. And, if I think back to, even at, say, university and then some of the training that I undertook early in my career, a lot of it was focused very much on the technical aspects of the job. And then you kind of learn the human side as you go through, making mistakes and so forth and owning those mistakes. So for me, going back to 18, it'd be like, look, young Kev, really think about people and those sort of interactions and developing that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the biggest thing that I hear all the time, and it's something really important to me, is people buy from people. Yeah. And, getting that balance right between being too much of a pest, keeping on at people versus actually not going back to people or not doing certain things. I think, so much of the time you've got to focus on do what you say you're going to do, but actually keep it at a level that, you wouldn't pester, maybe you would pester, a close friend or, a family member. And that, I think, has always been, a good business etiquette the whole way through sales. And you're right, a lot of the time it's, do you know how to sell a technology versus do you actually know how to sell to people? So I absolutely, I really love that.
There is that fine line between pestilence and persistence. And as salespeople, we walk that fine line all the time. But it really has to be about what does the individual or individuals need to achieve and need to accomplish. And, early in my career, when I recognized that, but it's about helping others, suddenly I became much more successful than I was before, because it was less about what I needed to achieve or what the company needed to achieve and more about helping the client. And I do think, prospects and clients, they detect that in their engagements with salespeople, and they can spot the salespeople that are just in it just to, get the deal, get the transaction, versus a salesperson that's really focused on outcomes, results, and that longer term relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And I think that's the biggest thing that most people overlook a lot of the time, isn't it? Yeah. So in a world where we both know it is full on emails, calls, traveling, especially for yourself more recently, tell me about you, obviously, in terms of your passion. Do you get spare time? And obviously, if you do, what's kind of Kev's, interest outside of work?
Yeah, so I do get some spare time.
Just a little bit.
Probably not as much as my family would like, but I am very passionate about work. I always have been. I've got workaholic tendencies, and that can infuriate people that are really close to me.
Sometimes it's a good
and
thing.
infuriate colleagues as well. But the reality of it is that's just who I am. That's part of my DNA. But outside of work, I love music. I absolutely love all aspects of music, all different genres.
Yep.
I dabble a little bit with music in the form of, at a party, I might jump on the decks and pretend to be a DJ. Picked up the guitar 15 years ago and messed around with the guitar and stuff. My son is actually an aspiring rock star. My daughter is a very good singer. So it kind of runs in the family. So, so outside of work, I've got a strong passion of, supporting my kids in the careers that they want to go in, which is music. So kind of part-time rock manager. And then, I love hanging out with my family, with my wife, and, when we travel together and spend time. But then my other passion is sailing. I love being out on the water and sailing. I had the opportunity at the weekend to be in the Solent with very little sailing, actually, Catherine, because there was no wind. And so we were just motoring for most of the time. But, being on a yacht, thinking about the passage that you need to make, looking at the weather, putting yourself against the elements, being in that teamwork environment and stuff. I just love it. It's fantastic.
I love that. And, it's something different as well, isn't it? Because a lot of people will talk about, cars or bikes or bits and pieces, but it's not going to be every day that you're going to be able to get out on the sailboat and, get out there. So, but it must be so nice to be out sort of in the great outdoors, to get out in the fresh air rather than sat behind it.
It is. And it's, if there's particularly difficult weather or rough weather, it can be, it can really test you mentally because, let's face it, on a sailboat, with 10-foot waves, it can be quite hairy, a little bit scary. If the weather's particularly bad and you start feeling a little bit queasy, it doesn't feel great at that time. But then when you reflect back on it, at least when I reflect back on it, I'm like, well, I did it and I achieved it. And I want to go back out again. Every single time I come off a yacht and go ashore, the first thing that's in my head is, when can I go back? And so, it just draws me back. So,
Oh, that's incredible. So where do you see yourself then in, say, next 3 to 5 years? Is that on a sailboat, perhaps maybe somewhere in the sunshine? Or do you have perhaps maybe other more kind of career, focus goals?
Yeah, career goals. I've joined Dataminr at a really interesting time for the business, as the business is, continuing to concentrate on the core areas of a product we have called First Alert for defense and corporate security. But after the acquisition of Threat Connect last year, there is a huge focus on cybersecurity, which is obviously great because of my background and so forth. And I've pivoted into running the international business. So EMEA and APAC. And that's something that I really wanted to do in my career. Most of my career has been spent either as an individual contributor working with enterprise organizations, some of which are headquartered overseas, or concentrating on Europe and the UK. So to be able to, have that experience of more global business is something that I'm really excited about. And I guess in 3 to 5 years' time, I
could see you sailing around APAC.
Well, I could be, sailing from Sydney to New Zealand or something. But no, I'll still be doing what I'm doing, right? I still have, I believe, a lot to offer in terms of both for customers, but then also in developing sales teams and helping salespeople in the way that I've been helped in my career. Because, I've only been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve because I've had some fantastic mentors, some great managers, and great leaders, some great role models. And so that's how. So I want to continue doing more. But you're right. If I can spend a bit more time on the water and, do
Get a little bit of sailing in there where you can.
Then that would be good. Yeah.
So we're going to spend a little bit more time going through the Dataminr piece, but I've just got one small little thing that I'm going to ask you before we go into Dataminr.
Sure.
So as you can see, we have the Talking Tech bin here, and very much like Room 101. I know you've also been very, very super prepared, and you've already chosen your two things, but I would love to know what two things you've written down, and for the Talking Tech bin.
Well, I'm gonna lead off with one that I've just mentioned, which is a passion of mine, which is music, and I really love all different aspects of music. But I can't stand the bland kind of pop, music that comes out. And so what I've chosen to put in the Talking Tech 101 is Top Loader.
Gotcha.
So Top Loader, that which some people will be thinking, who the hell are they? But I just. I find their music to be just so annoying and frustrating. It's like there's nothing happens in the song. It's just
mundane.
There's the road, there's the middle, there's Top Loader. It's just, it's music for lifts. So, definitely Top Loader.
And I'm pleased that you actually kind of separated it out then, because I thought you were going to put music in, and I thought, wow, that's going to be a big unpopular decision, and especially if you've just spoken about it. But I get the kind of Top Loader thing. So.
Yeah.
Love it.
So Top Load is the first one, and then the second one is just I'm a really impatient person, and
I think you have to be in sales, don't you?
Yes, perhaps. I mean, it's, but I'm impatient with everything that I do. I'm impatient, at home. I'm obviously impatient at work. My daughter says I'm classic airport dad, get to the airport, elbows out, charging. But one thing that I find really frustrating, partially because it's outside of my control, is travel delays. So whenever there's a delay, on a train or a plane and stuff, just like particularly, when say a plane lands and, it's pulled up to its stand, and you're just kind of waiting to get off what can feel like an enormous amount of time. And it's just like, I just want to get on. Come on, let us off the plane.
Off the plane,
So for me, that if that could be fixed and that never happens again, then I would be a very happy person.
I completely agree with you on that. Is it because you've actually spent the last few days travelling and it's you've been delayed?
Well, I mean, actually, the travel the last couple of days has been okay, but it's just I've had some horror stories in terms of travel. I mean, once with a colleague, we flew to Lithuania to train a SOC team for one of our clients, and we ran some exercises with them. And believe it or not, we flew to the city we were flying to. We could only fly Ryanair, but when we were returning, there was a bomb scare on the plane.
Oh wow! That you definitely don't need that.
No, you don't need that. And that was probably the worst delay ever, because when the plane did land at Stansted and we taxied off to extreme corner of part of the airfield, and then we got picked up by buses, surrounded by police, taken in. We were delayed for 4 hours. But Ryanair did give us a voucher for £5 so we could buy a sandwich. So that was very generous of them.
Definitely not worth the travel delay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, on to the really important piece. Not that you weren't important, because you are, but Dataminr. I would love to know a little bit more about Dataminr. What attracted you to kind of joining them as well? I mean, I know obviously when I first came across them 18-ish months ago, I've never seen anything like the tech that obviously they have and they've created. So tell me a little bit more about obviously why you joined and about them themselves.
They're such a pioneering company in the world of artificial intelligence. And when I first learned and saw the capabilities of the platform and the impact that was having for organizations globally, not just in terms of helping them do business, but also in the fact that Dataminr is literally saving lives. It's being used by the emergency services. It's being used by NGOs. It's being used by the military. I was just so blown away by the capabilities and what had been built over the course of the last 15 years. So the technology was definitely a massive pull for me because of that level of capability. The second thing was the people. I mean, as I was considering joining Dataminr, I was I was meeting with a number of individuals, and every single person was very passionate about the business and the direction of the business and the capabilities. And I think the third thing was the acquisition of Threat Connect.
Yeah.
The acquisition of Threat Connect in combination with Dataminr's threat and risk intelligence platform, the light bulb went off in my mind around what that could mean, because, think about, for the last 15 years, I've been helping organizations detect and respond to cyber attacks through the implementation of security operations platforms. And we've always assumed breach. We assume that the adversary is on the network. And because the adversary is on the network, it's how quickly can we detect them and how quickly can we respond to them. But if you think about what happened last year with JLR and Marks and Spencer, I mean, those organizations had cybersecurity teams in place that are experienced with good skills, good capabilities. They've got the processes in place. They're audited and they've got governance. They've got some incredible technologies, and yet still they fall victim to devastating cyber attacks. And thinking about the Dataminr proposition, when we bring Dataminr and Threat Connect together, what that means is that organizations can give themselves a much longer lead time than they would otherwise have to be able to mitigate a problem before it becomes a problem. And, that ability to really ultimately help the organizations avoid those types of things was something that I found really inspirational. And at that point, it was like, actually, this is something that I feel strongly about. I feel like this is going to help a number of organizations in their fight against both cybercrime, but also nation state threat actors.
Yeah. And I think it does make such a difference, especially it's almost like one of those brands, isn't it, that people don't know the brand, but then they actually have the context of what that brand produces, the news channels and the amount of data sources that they collect it from. And, in real time, if companies are relying on that, that makes them able to, to sort of respond faster and quicker than anything else. Yeah. Talk to me about, because as you mentioned, everybody's talking about AI at the moment. It's the big buzzword and everybody's kind of using certain AI engines to... Obviously, Dataminr, it was their own proprietary platform. They built it from scratch many years ago. Yeah. Talk to me about the kind of the power of, Dataminr and how that is changing things for customers.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on it, Catherine, when you talk about just the sheer volume of signals that are out there. To be able to, in real time, take signals from over 1 million different sources, including, the dark web, the deep web, the surface web, Internet of Things. I was meeting with a client yesterday. They're a shipping organization and they're using Dataminr's capability to, track some of their cargo ships through AIS transponders. I mean, just bringing that signal in. I mean, to be able to capture all of that information at source, whether it's text, video, audio, images in 150 different languages, and to be able to assimilate that information rapidly in such a way that the organization can have this curated list of events that are absolutely pertinent to the organization because they could cause some level of disruption, some kind of outage or threat to an individual and so forth. That's so powerful. And that's been built from the ground up. And before AI was the buzzword, and this isn't a, we've just bolted on, a chatbot into our product. The whole capability around threat and risk intelligence has been mindfully engineered to include these developing capabilities. We've got, again, we're very fortunate that we've got some incredible data scientists and AI experts, PhDs working for us, a massive concentration of individuals within our engineering and development function that deeply understand this domain and this discipline, as well as then subject matter experts on geopolitical risk, cybercrime, cyber threats and so forth. So that combination of people is and capability is really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's lovely to hear. I think, again, as you mentioned, something that has been built from the ground up.
Yeah.
And with experts in place that have really kind of used that intelligence to move it forwards.
Yeah.
Again, from a data miner's perspective, obviously, over the last, say, year to 18 months, it's obviously gone through quite a few changes. Talk to me about kind of some of those changes, things like the rebranding, the kind of 3 different pillars within the organisation and the certain pillar that obviously you look after as well.
Yeah. Yeah. An organisation needs to focus. The platform has got such amazing capability, and as you've already said, it's being used by news organisations. It's, as I mentioned, it's been used by NGOs. Our business as we go forward is concentrating on defence through a platform that we have called First Alert. It's already being widely used by defence organisations around the world. Obviously, corporate security is a hugely important topic, given everything that's happening right now in the Middle East. I mean, we've got clients that have thousands of employees in that region, and they need to know with precision, which obviously we provide in terms of the accuracy and the fidelity of our alerts. And they need to rapidly know with speed, which is another hallmark of our capability, what is happening and whether or not to, advise the people to shelter or whether they need to evacuate them. Massively important capability. And of course, on cyber, the threat landscape continues to develop at speed. We talk about the cyber domain being an extension of war. You've got kind of land, air, sea, space, and cyber. And so when we see these geopolitical tensions really start to increase, the extension into cyber increases as well, and organizations in Western countries are under attack from threat actors and so forth. So the fusion of our capabilities together of bringing in the threat and risk intelligence with a platform, what we're really doing from the cyber standpoint is we're helping organizations rapidly understand if they're going to be under attack, and we're doing that by the intelligence that we're gathering across all of those, domains that we've mentioned before, all of those sources. So is an attack about to come? The second question that we're helping organizations understand is this going to matter to them? Yeah. Because, if there's a new vulnerability that's been discovered by a researcher or by a threat actor, and they're talking about it in a dark corner of the dark web, and, we obviously detect that. But if the organization doesn't have the version of that software installed within their environment, then it's informational, but it's not going to impact them, so they don't necessarily need to prioritize. Well, they don't prioritize it because they don't have the software in place. So it's going to miss them. But equally, when there is a vulnerability or there is some intelligence that indicates there's a campaign that's about to start on that organization or on that sector, knowing about that quickly is imperative so that they can then harden their attack surface and ensure that they're not going to be attacked in that way. And then the final piece that we're helping organizations with is around the ability to quantify what these risks are for an organization. There's so many conversations I've had over the years with security leaders where they talk about their interactions with their board of directors, and it's a different language. The language of cybersecurity is different to the language of business. And, as a profession, we've been trying to close that gap. Well, with Dataminr, we have the ability to equip cybersecurity leaders with that language of business, because we can help them articulate through our software exactly what the cost of the risk would be to them, so they can prioritize their activities. They can concentrate on, let's say that there's a threat to a payment processing application or system. It's got millions of dollars going in. That's clearly much more important than a small dev server that's not particularly relevant to the organization. So it's that type of intelligence that we're providing to organizations. And
that's kind of the big difference, isn't it, between, waiting 20 minutes, half an hour, several hours, even days or weeks later.
Yeah.
The impact obviously increases along, a long time if you don't kind of have that in real time and you can't resolve it quickly enough. So
I mean, last year we we identified a threat 6 months before it was being talked about and listed as on the kind of CVE kind of tables and so forth, etc. I mean, that's, think about that length of time that we're providing to an organization. And we've had situations where organizations have had a lead time of days to be able to resolve something. That's really important because again, you're quite right. I mean, speed is essential in this, fight against cyber criminals and cyber attackers.
Absolutely. No, it's been very, very impressive. And I think some of the things that equally people aren't aware of, when they are aware of it, it's too late. So again, I love that fact. So there are lots of resources available for people interested in Dataminr, and more recently the 2026 Cyber Threat Landscape Report. But talk to me about if somebody's looking at Dataminr and they want somebody to go. Obviously, we're going to include resources and links and certain things for obviously all the audience to take a look at. But where would you kind of point people to in terms of resources, information, and so on?
Well, we've got a wealth of information clearly on our website, and the huge amount of really insightful collateral. I mean, you've mentioned one already, Catherine, the Threat Landscape Report for 2026. That's got some incredible, powerful themes in terms of both the research that we've conducted, the metrics, but also indicating areas of advantage that an organization can take by just implementing some of the processes and procedures that we're talking about. So that's a definite fantastic resource. We've also got a significant amount of information relating to the capabilities that we've brought to market. RSA, at RSA, we announced Dataminr for Cyber Defense, which is a fusion of these capabilities. We're very excited about it. If any of the people that are watching this podcast are interested in exploring it further, of course, they can go to the website, but equally they can contact me.
Absolutely.
I'll provide my contact details as part of this podcast. I'd love to have a conversation and explain to individuals how what we're doing is actually game changing for them in terms of improving their cybersecurity posture. And just to make it a bit of fun, for the first 3 people that contact me after watching this podcast, we'll give them a £200 voucher for Lego, so they can go and spend.
Nice. I think I might have a look.
Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of great information that we've carefully created to add value. And then the other piece that I would say is absolutely, I think is really important. We're obviously detecting signals, some very serious potential threats to organizations, and we publish cyber intel briefs. And I would really encourage people to subscribe to the blogs that we publish, because in those cyber intel briefs, not only are we describing the intelligence that we're collecting, but we're also giving recommendations as to how organizations can address those threats. So there's a great source of information.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's, and again, from the audience's point of view, something that I found just mind-blowing was the fact that you could, again, in real time, start to put in, your company's information or certain things that are really specific to you. And gathering that information was almost like, going on the web and typing into Google, I want to see this. It was just phenomenal. So again, anybody check out, obviously the Lego vouchers definitely help. So check it out. But again, we'll include all the resources and everything else below. One thing before I kind of finish up the session is I have a little challenge for you.
Okay.
There is a leaderboard. The current time at the moment to beat is 1 minute and 17 seconds. So I'm going to introduce the Tower of Hanoi here to you. The idea, and everybody's super competitive about this at the moment, the idea is to get all of those 5 discs from one peg to another. It doesn't matter which one. You can only move one at a time, and it has to be a smaller disc on top of a bigger disc. So I'm going to give you 4 minutes. We're going to time, and you need to be able to, well, if you can do it in the 4 minutes, if you can do it quicker, brilliant, but you will be placed onto the leaderboard. So I challenge you to take on the Tower of Hanoi.
Challenge accepted. he says with some level of trepidation.
I feel like there might be a new leader on the leaderboard. You need to knock Doppel off of the top spot.
Well, I'll give it. You know what? I haven't done this genuinely since I was a kid, and I can't recall being particularly.
I like the fact that you've actually done it before, and a lot of people are kind of very very scared and even sweating. So you look very calm and collected. So ready, steady, go. Okay.
So you're going to talk me through what you're seeing here.
I am.
Yeah.
And I think that the nice thing, again, if you can do this under pressure, then you should be able to completely nail it. But yes, there's definitely a technique to doing it, and I feel like you know the technique pretty well.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm figuring it out as I go along, and it's actually very stressful, Catherine.
It is.
So where do I go from here? Wow.
And it looks so easy,
it looks
doesn't
so
it?
simple,
Sometimes
and it's so deceptive. It's like, how do I get that one onto
It's
there?
always the last disc that kind of stumbles everybody.
It is the last disc, but there must be a way of... I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that back on there, and that one... I felt like I was starting quite well, but there's something not quite right here. Right, let's try and do this.
Feel like...
All right.
There we go.
Okay. And it's this one it's got to go to.
It can be either one. So it can be the middle one. As long as it just moves the peg. Wow. There's definitely a kind of rhythm to it, isn't there?
There is, and under different circumstances, this could be quite therapeutic. But under this circumstance, it's really not therapeutic. No. It's actually
when you're being timed.
When you're being timed, and when you're, and of course, because I'm talking, I'm also not concentrating.
I know that there'll be a few people in the industry equally who will be watching this going, come on.
Come on, Kev, you can do this. Right. Oh, I think I might be there. I think I might be nearly there.
Look at that. Well done.
That was seriously stressful.
So we are on 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So you weren't quite top of the leaderboard, but you still did it in 4 minutes. So I think you did very, very well.
Okay,
I'm very
impressed. Thank you, very, very kind. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Well, that just leaves me to say thank you so much, obviously, for coming in the studio.
My pleasure.
Again, Dataminr, big favourite for me. For all the audience, as I said, we've got lots of resources for you to check out. I would highly recommend reaching out to Kev. We'll put all his contact details below, and check out future episodes coming soon.